The market was alive with noise, voices mixing in the air, traders shouting their prices, and customers bargaining for food and goods. Among the crowd moved a woman with pale skin and tired eyes. She was not human. Her features were different, sharp and alien, her thin frame hidden under worn cloth. In her arms, she carried a small child whose lips had lost all color. The child's head rested weakly against her shoulder, too tired to lift it, too weak even to cry. For 3 days, neither of them had eaten. The mother had begged before, but each time she was pushed away, insulted or ignored. Now her steps were slow, heavy with despair, but her arms still tightened around her child, as if her strength alone could keep the little one alive. She stopped near a food stall where the smell of roasted bread and fried meat filled the air. Her eyes locked on the scraps falling from the table, pieces that no one wanted. Her voice shook as she whispered, almost too low to be heard, "Please, just the leftovers. My child, he has not eaten." She held out a trembling hand, her voice breaking as she tried to speak again. People close by turned their heads, some curious, others disgusted. The vendor, a thick-bodied alien with a wide mouth, looked down at her with cold eyes. He laughed, shaking his head. "No charity here. Move away, beggar." The woman's knees wobbled, but she didn't leave. She lowered herself slightly, bowing her head, pressing her cheek against her child's hair. The boy gave a weak cough, his chest rattling. His small fingers twitched as though reaching for the bread he could smell but not touch. The mother's voice cracked louder now, full of desperation. "Please, he will die. Just one bite. Even the waste is enough." Around them, a circle of people began to form. Most were silent. Some whispered to each other, their eyes glancing between the mother and the vendor. A few laughed, amused by her misery. One of them muttered, "Pathetic. Always begging. Let them starve." Another said softly, "It's cruel, but no one will risk punishment for helping her." Among the crowd stood a human soldier, broad-shouldered and scarred across one cheek. His name was Daniel, though most only knew him as the quiet one who stayed on the colony's edge. He had been sent there as part of peacekeeping duty, but he felt more like an outsider than a guard. He had been standing near the fruit stall, a small ration pack in his pocket, when he heard her voice. He turned, his eyes landing on the thin mother and the dying child in her arms. For a moment, he stayed still. He had seen suffering before. He had seen it on battlefields, in ruined cities, in places where even the strong fell. But something in the way the child's small hand hung lifeless, something in the mother's broken whisper, cut through his heart sharper than any wound. His jaw tightened, and he took a step forward. The vendor noticed him and raised a hand. "Stay out of this, human. It's not your concern." The soldier did not answer. His boots carried him closer. The crowd murmured louder now, watching carefully. Everyone knew the rules. Humans helping alien beggars were punished. The soldier knew it too, but his eyes did not leave the child's face. He knelt down slowly in front of the mother. She looked up at him with shock, fear flashing in her eyes. She thought he might strike her for begging. Instead, his hand moved to his pocket. He pulled out his ration pack, his only meal for the day. The mother's lips parted, her throat tightening with disbelief. Daniel's rough voice was steady as he spoke. "For him. Take it." Her eyes widened, tears spilling down her cheeks. But she didn't move. She knew the danger. To accept food from a human could mean arrest, maybe worse. She shook her head slightly, whispering, I cannot." The child's fingers stirred again, brushing against the soldier's hand. Daniel unwrapped the small ration, breaking a piece and holding it closer. The smell drifted into the boy's nose. The child opened his mouth weakly, and a faint sound came out, half whimper, half cry. The mother's heart broke hearing it. Her arms shook, torn between fear and hope. She looked around and saw the eyes of the crowd watching her, some curious, some hateful, none willing to help. She looked back at the soldier. His eyes were not cruel. They carried something else, something she had almost forgotten existed. The vendor's voice cut the air, sharp and angry. "Stop this at once! Guards! Guards!" The crowd gasped. The mother's chest heaved as panic filled her. She tried to rise, but her legs failed her. Daniel stayed on one knee, his large frame shielding her and the child from the vendor's glare. His voice rumbled low but firm. "You will not take this from him." The people held their breath. The child's small mouth closed on the piece of food, chewing slowly, weakly, but swallowing. A spark of life flickered back into his face, his eyes fluttering open for the first time in hours. The mother covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing quietly. The guards had not yet arrived, but the shouts grew louder. The soldier stood, towering now, his ration still open in his palm. He looked down at the vendor, his voice steady, dangerous. He eats, or I fight every one of you to keep him alive. The market's noise faded into silence. Every eye was fixed on the scene. A starving child, a desperate mother, and a human soldier standing against them all. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The shouts of the vendor echoed across the market as he called for the guards. His thick voice carried anger, but underneath it was fear. Fear of losing control, fear that others might follow the human's example. The mother clutched her child tighter, pressing her face against his thin hair, as if to hide him from what was coming. Around them, the crowd's whispers grew louder, excitement and tension mixing like fire and smoke. Some leaned closer to see what would happen, while others stepped back, not wanting to be involved. Daniel did not move. He stood tall, his broad frame shielding the mother and her child. The half-eaten ration pack rested in his hand, its faint smell of salt and bread still filling the air. The child had already swallowed a small piece, and though weak, his chest rose with steadier breaths. That tiny sign of life only strengthened Daniel's resolve. His eyes burned as he looked at the vendor, then at the approaching figures pushing through the market. 2 guards in dark uniforms, their weapons strapped across their backs, their sharp alien faces twisted with authority. The vendor pointed wildly at Daniel, shouting, "He breaks our law! He feeds the unworthy! Arrest him! Arrest the woman too!" The mother's heart dropped. Her legs trembled as she lowered her head, expecting chains, punishment, maybe even death. She whispered to her child softly, "Stay quiet, little one. Stay with me." Her voice cracked under the weight of fear. The guards stopped a few steps away, their cold eyes studying Daniel. One of them, tall and narrow with pale green skin, spoke sharply. "Human, step aside. This is not your matter." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said nothing at first, but when the second guard moved closer, hand resting on his weapon, Daniel's voice came out low and heavy. "I will not step aside." The words froze the air around them. The crowd gasped. No one defied the guards. The vendor laughed nervously, thinking the human would be beaten down in seconds. "Fool, you think you can stand against law?" The guards exchanged looks. They were trained to deal with violence, with smugglers, with thieves. But this was different. This was a soldier standing still, not attacking, not fleeing, only protecting a weak alien mother and her child. His eyes did not hold fear. They held something more dangerous, conviction. The taller guard took a step forward. "You break our custom. To feed the undeserving is forbidden. She chose her path. If the child starves, it is her fate." Daniel's voice cut through the noise, deep and steady. No child deserves to starve. No mother should beg for waste while food rots on tables. His words carried far, reaching the ears of every listener. Some in the crowd lowered their heads, ashamed, while others shook them angrily, refusing to be moved. The shorter guard raised his hand. "Enough! Hand over the food, human, or you will be taken." Daniel looked down at the boy, who licked his lips faintly, his small eyes half open. Then he looked at the mother, whose tears streaked across her face as she whispered again, Please don't bring harm upon yourself for us." But Daniel only tightened his grip on the ration pack. "If you want it," he said, his voice like stone, "you'll have to fight me for it." The crowd erupted into shouts, some cheering, others jeering. "Mad human," one cried. "He'll be crushed in moments," another muttered. But there were voices too, quiet at first, rising louder. "He's right. No child should die like this. Why do the guards allow this cruelty?" The vendor grew pale, realizing the mood was shifting. He barked back at the people, "Silence! He is an outsider. He knows nothing of our ways." Still, the whispers did not stop. Some of the poorer aliens, those who had once been hungry themselves, stared at the soldier with wide eyes. They had never seen anyone stand up to the law for a beggar before. The guards stiffened, their patience breaking. The tall one reached for his weapon. The mother gasped and pulled her child tighter, her body curling protectively. But Daniel stepped forward, his presence like a wall of iron. His hand was empty, except for the ration pack, but his stance was unshaken. "Draw your weapon if you must," he said coldly. But understand this, I will not let you take food from his mouth." The crowd's noise became a storm. Every eye was fixed on the moment, waiting to see if blood would spill. The guards hesitated, reading the air, realizing too many witnesses surrounded them. A wrong step could ignite anger in the market, anger that even they could not contain. The child coughed again, a thin sound, but his eyes blinked slowly open. He looked at Daniel, then at his mother, and for the first time, his lips formed a faint word. It was not clear, not strong, but it was a sound of life. The mother gasped, hope filling her chest like a spark in the dark. Daniel's voice softened, just enough for her to hear. "He will live, I promise you." The guards lowered their weapons slightly, caught between law and the risk of riot. The vendor shouted louder, desperate. "Why do you wait? Arrest him! Arrest them both!" But the crowd had changed. Murmurs of support grew bolder. "Let the child eat. This is wrong. Even the human sees what we ignore." The guards felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, the heat of judgment pressing in. The tall guard growled under his breath, pointing at Daniel. "This is not finished. You will regret this defiance." Then, with a sharp gesture, they turned away, retreating slowly through the crowd. The vendor shouted in rage, but no one listened. Daniel knelt once more, breaking another piece of food for the boy. The mother's hands shook as she helped her son chew. She whispered again and again, "Thank you, thank you." Her tears fell freely now, no longer from fear, but from the fragile light of hope. The market was still alive with sound, but everything had changed. A single act of defiance had planted something dangerous, an idea. If a human stranger would stand against the law for a starving child, then what excuse did the rest of them have for turning away? The sun lowered over the colony, and the shadows of tall buildings stretched across the market streets. The crowd slowly scattered, but whispers remained heavy in the air. Some talked in hushed tones about the human soldier who had dared to defy the guards. Others shook their heads, warning that his actions would bring punishment soon. Daniel ignored them all. He stayed by the mother and her child, kneeling close, handing another small piece of his ration to the boy. The boy chewed slowly, his thin face showing small signs of strength. His eyes, once dull, began to shine faintly with life. The mother watched every bite with tears rolling down her cheeks. She had not seen her child swallow food in days, and now, against every expectation, he was still alive. She looked at Daniel with disbelief, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Why? Why did you do this? You could be killed for helping us." Daniel's gaze stayed firm. His voice was low, steady, as if his words came from years of unspoken weight. "Because no one else would. Because someone had to." Her chest tightened at those words. She bowed her head, ashamed that her pride had broken so far as to beg in front of strangers. But shame no longer mattered when her child breathed a little easier. She reached out, her thin fingers brushing Daniel's hand as she whispered again, "I have nothing to give you. Nothing at all." Daniel shook his head. "You've already given me something. You reminded me why I fight." Before she could answer, the sound of boots echoed in the distance. Not just two pairs, but many. Heavy, steady steps. The crowd that had lingered scattered quickly, melting into alleys and doorways. Fear returned, choking the air. The mother's eyes widened in panic, and she clutched her child closer, whispering, "They are coming back." Daniel stood tall, scanning the street. At the far end, a squad of guards appeared, 6 of them this time, marching together with weapons drawn. Their armor glistened under the setting sun. The leader, broader than the rest, carried an energy staff that hummed with power. His face was twisted in a scowl. The mother's knees weakened. Her voice cracked. "You must leave us. If they catch you with us, they will kill you." Daniel looked down at her, then at the boy in her arms. His face hardened. "I don't run." The guards approached, their leader raising his staff. His voice boomed across the street. "Human, you dare defy our law? You dare shame our order in front of the people? You will be punished for this crime." Daniel stood his ground. His voice cut back across the distance, calm but unyielding. "The crime is yours. A law that lets children starve is no law at all." The leader's eyes narrowed, rage flashing. He motioned for his men to surround the area. The mother gasped, holding her child so tight that he whimpered softly. Daniel took a step forward, placing himself fully between them and the guards. His fists clenched, but his voice was steady. "If you want them, you go through me." The tension in the street tightened like a blade ready to strike. The guards sneered. Some of the hidden onlookers whispered in fear, others in awe. A human standing alone against 6 armed soldiers was madness, but also something few had ever seen before. The leader stepped closer, pointing his staff directly at Daniel's chest. The weapon crackled with blue sparks. You think you can protect them? You are one. We are many. Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes locked on the leader without blinking. Maybe, but I will not move. And when I fall, you will carry the shame of killing a soldier who defended a starving child. The words carried further than he expected. In the shadows, people listened. Some of them, poor and forgotten, felt fire stirring in their chests. They had been silent for years, watching cruelty pass as law, but this moment was different. The mother's breath shook as she whispered, "You cannot win, but still, you stand." Her eyes filled with something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The leader raised his staff higher, the hum growing louder, filling the air with dread. But just as he prepared to strike, a small sound broke through the silence. The boy coughed weakly, then reached out a trembling hand toward Daniel. His lips moved, forming one word, broken and faint but clear enough to hear, "Papa." The world seemed to freeze. The mother's eyes went wide, tears spilling faster. The guards hesitated, confused. Daniel looked down, his chest tightening at the word. He had no child of his own, but in that moment the boy's frail voice struck deeper than any weapon. The leader snarled, trying to shake off the moment. "Enough! Seize them all!" The guards moved forward, but the air shifted. From the edges of the street, figures began stepping out. Common aliens, traders, workers, even beggars. They stood in silence at first, then closer together. None carried weapons, but their presence itself was a wall. The crowd had returned. Whispers grew louder. "The child deserves food. The human is right. We cannot keep living like this." The guards stopped, unsettled. The leader barked at them to advance, but their steps faltered. Too many eyes watched, too many voices murmured. A spark of defiance had spread through the people, and sparks had a way of becoming fire. Daniel stood tall, his shadow stretching long under the fading light. His voice carried again, louder this time. "This ends now. You cannot silence hunger with fear. You cannot chain mercy with law." The mother sobbed quietly, holding her child, her heart racing with a new feeling, belief. For the first time in years, she believed they might survive this night. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, the leader trembling with anger, but in their eyes flickered doubt. And in the silence that followed, the weight of choice pressed down on every soul in the market. The leader of the guards gritted his teeth, his staff glowing brighter as blue sparks hissed through the air. His voice thundered over the street. "Move aside, all of you. Anyone who dares stand with this human will share his fate." His words were meant to scare, to remind the people of the power that ruled over them. For a moment, silence followed, heavy and uncertain. The guards shifted uneasily, their weapons humming with deadly energy, ready to strike. Daniel did not move. His boots stayed firm against the ground, his wide frame like a wall in front of the mother and child. His eyes never left the guard leader, sharp and steady, like a predator watching its prey. The mother trembled behind him, clutching her boy, her heart pounding so fast she thought it might break. Her son's tiny voice still echoed in her ears. "Papa." It gave her courage, even if fear still wrapped tightly around her chest. A small voice rose from the crowd, shaky but brave. "Let them eat." Everyone turned to see an old alien man with bent shoulders standing among the watchers. His hands trembled, but his eyes were bright. "The child deserves food." Another voice joined in, louder this time. "The human speaks truth. Hunger should not be law." Soon murmurs spread from one corner to another. The crowd was shifting, the people no longer silent. The guards glanced at each other, unease creeping in. They were trained to control with fear, but now fear was turning against them. The leader roared, raising his staff higher. "Silence!" The staff sparked violently, and the crowd shrank back a step. The blue light bathed the street in harsh glow. The mother cried out softly, shielding her child with her body. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He took a slow step forward. The crackling end of the staff stopped just inches from his chest, the deadly hum loud in his ears. Still, he did not flinch. His voice was deep, carrying to every corner of the market. "Strike me down then. Show them what your law truly is. Kill a soldier for saving a child. The crowd held their breath. The guards froze, their eyes flicking from Daniel to the people, then back to their leader. The tension was like a rope pulled to its limit, ready to snap at any second. The leader sneered, pushing the staff harder against Daniel's chest. Sparks kissed his shirt, threatening to burn. You think your death will matter, human? You are nothing here. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his eyes like steel. Then why do your hands shake? The words cut deep. The leader's grip tightened on the staff, but his arm trembled. The crowd saw it. The people began to whisper louder, courage building. He is afraid. The human does not move. Who is weak now? Anger twisted the leader's face. With a roar, he swung the staff to strike. The deadly light flashed through the air, but Daniel caught it with both hands. The weapon sparked violently against his palms, burning through skin, but he held on, refusing to let go. The crackling light filled the street, shadows dancing wildly across stone walls. The guards rushed forward, but the people surged too. Dozens stepped between, blocking the way, shouting, "No more! Enough!" Some grabbed stones, others raised empty fists. The air was alive with rebellion. Daniel's arms strained as the energy of the staff pulsed against him. His jaw locked tight, sweat sliding down his face. The mother cried out, watching in horror, but also in awe. He was only one man, yet he held back the weapon of their oppressor with nothing but his strength and will. With a growl, Daniel twisted his body, wrenching the staff from the leader's grip. The weapon clattered to the ground, sparks scattering across the dirt. The leader stumbled backward, shocked, humiliated. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Daniel stood tall, the weapon lying at his feet. His hands were burned, blood running across his knuckles, but his eyes burned brighter than the sparks. He did not pick up the staff. Instead, he stepped on it, grinding the humming crystal tip into silence. The weapon shattered with a sharp crack. The crowd roared. It was not just sound, it was release, years of fear breaking apart. The guards looked around nervously, their confidence shaken. The people were no longer quiet observers. They were standing, shouting, defying. The leader's face twisted with rage and humiliation. "Seize him!" he screamed, pointing at Daniel. But the guards hesitated. They looked at the people pressing closer, at the fury in their eyes, at the way even the poor and weak now stood taller. The mother rose slowly from the ground, her child in her arms. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong enough for all to hear. "He saved my son. When no one else did, he gave us life." Her words struck like arrows, piercing through the noise. Others began to echo her. "He is right. The human speaks truth. No more starving children." The guards' hands tightened on their weapons, but they did not move. They were outnumbered, and for the first time, they felt it. The balance of power had shifted. Daniel's voice rose above the chaos, steady and commanding. "Your laws are broken. Hunger is not justice. Fear is not order. Today it ends." The leader, red with fury, looked at his men for support, but none stepped forward. The people closed in, surrounding them. For the first time in years, the guards were the ones who looked small. The boy stirred in his mother's arms, his eyes blinking open. He looked at Daniel again, his lips parting to whisper the faint word once more. "Papa." The crowd fell silent, hearts thundering. The sound of a single child's voice carried more weight than all the guards' threats. The mother's tears fell freely, but now they were mixed with hope. Daniel stood firm, his burned hands hanging at his sides, his eyes fixed on the guards who no longer dared move forward. The night had come, but something brighter than the sun burned in the hearts of the people. A spark had turned to fire, and nothing would ever be the same again. The broken weapon lay on the ground, its sparks fading into smoke. The guards stared at it in disbelief, their leader's face pale with shock and rage. Around them, the crowd pressed closer, no longer silent, no longer afraid. Their voices rose like a tide, strong and unyielding. "Let them go. No more starving children. He speaks truth." Daniel stood in the center of it all, his burned hands trembling slightly at his sides. Pain shot through his arms, but he showed no weakness. His eyes were sharp, his posture unbending. The mother stood just behind him, clutching her son. Her tears had not stopped, but her voice was steady now. "You see him. You see my child. Would any of you have given him food? No. But this human did. When all of you turned away, he saved us." The crowd fell quiet at her words, then roared louder than before. The guards flinched as the noise pressed in like a storm. For years they had ruled by silence, but now silence was broken. The leader lifted his chin, trying to recover his pride. His voice was sharp and filled with venom. Do not be fools. This human is nothing. He is an outsider who knows nothing of our ways. He has no place here. Daniel turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. His voice rose steady and clear. Then tell me, who among you would let your child starve? Who among you would watch your neighbor die and say it is law? His words echoed through the night, cutting deeper than the leader's threats. The crowd shifted. A woman near the front lifted her thin arms and shouted, "My daughter once begged, and no one helped. I was too afraid to speak. But no more." Others joined her. "We have all lost children to hunger. The law is cruel. Enough is enough." The guards' eyes darted nervously, their grips loosening on their weapons. Fear twisted into doubt, and doubt into hesitation. The leader felt the tide slipping away, but his pride chained him. He drew a hidden blade from his belt, its curved edge glowing faintly. His eyes locked on Daniel. "Then I will cut down this fool and end your hope before it grows." Gasps filled the air. The mother clutched her child tighter, her body shaking. Daniel stepped forward, unarmed, but his stance unbroken. His voice came calm, even as danger loomed. "Try it. But understand this. You will not just fight me. You will fight every heart here." The crowd answered with a thunderous shout, their voices shaking the street. The guards took involuntary steps back, but the leader lunged forward, blade flashing. Daniel moved fast, his soldier's instincts sharp. He caught the leader's arm, the blade slicing across his already burned hand, blood spilling down his wrist. The pain was sharp, but he twisted the leader's arm with all his strength. The blade clattered to the ground. The people cheered wildly, their voices echoing off stone walls. The leader stumbled, fury and shame twisting his face. His guards stood frozen, unwilling to rush forward, unwilling to be crushed between the human and the rising anger of the people. Daniel bent slowly, his breath heavy, and picked up the blade. The mother watched with wide eyes, thinking he would strike the leader down. But instead, he turned, holding the weapon high for all to see. Then, with deliberate force, he snapped it across his knee. The metal cracked loudly, the pieces falling to the ground. The crowd erupted into cries of triumph. It was not just the breaking of a weapon, it was the breaking of fear. The leader's knees trembled as he stared at the shattered blade. For years, his rule had been built on fear of weapons, on the silence of the weak. But now both had been destroyed. He looked around at the crowd pressing closer, at the faces no longer bowed, at the eyes burning with courage. For the first time, he saw something that terrified him more than rebellion: unity. The mother stepped forward, her voice carrying in the rising storm. "You call him nothing. You call him outsider. But he is the only one who remembered mercy. What does that make you?" The leader's mouth opened, but no words came out. The people shouted again, louder. "Mercy! Justice! No more law of hunger!" Daniel dropped the broken blade at the leader's feet. His voice came low but clear, a warning that carried across the square. "Go! Leave this place, or stay, and watch your rule burn tonight." The guards exchanged nervous glances. One by one, they lowered their weapons. The leader snarled, but his men no longer obeyed. He saw it in their eyes. Fear of him was gone, replaced by fear of the people. With a final glare, he spat at the ground and turned sharply, retreating into the shadows. His guards followed, their heads lowered in shame. The market exploded in cheers. People cried, shouted, and raised their fists high. For the first time, voices rose not in fear but in strength. The poor, the weak, those who had always kept their heads down now stood tall. Daniel breathed heavily, his burned and bleeding hands shaking at his sides. The mother reached him, her child still in her arms. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "You changed everything," she whispered. Daniel looked down at the boy, who was breathing more evenly now, his cheeks no longer as pale. The child blinked at him, then gave the smallest, faintest smile. Daniel's heart tightened at the sight, the pain in his hands forgotten. Around them, the crowd was no longer just a group of strangers. They were a force. They were no longer silent. And in the middle of it all stood a human soldier who had given up his only meal to save a starving child. The night sky stretched above, stars hidden behind smoke, but hope glowed brighter than the dark. Something had shifted forever, and none of them would forget this day. The market remained alive with the sound of voices long after the guards retreated. People whispered to each other, their eyes bright with something unfamiliar. Courage. For years, they had lived under silent fear, but tonight, fear had cracked. They had seen a human soldier, one man alone, stand against weapons and power. And he had not fallen. Daniel's hands burned with pain, blood drying across his knuckles where the staff and blade had torn his flesh. Yet he showed no weakness. He stood straight, scanning the faces of the crowd. He knew this moment was fragile. The people's courage was new, like a spark on dry grass, bright but easy to crush if no fire caught. He had to keep them burning. The mother stood at his side, her child still weak but breathing easier than before. She held him tightly against her chest, afraid to let go. Every few moments she looked up at Daniel, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. Her son stirred in her arms, his tiny hand brushing against Daniel's arm. Again, in a faint whisper, he said the word that had silenced the crowd before. "Papa." Gasps rose once more, but this time they were not shocked. There was something warmer in the sound. Some in the crowd smiled, others wiped their eyes. The mother pressed her lips to her child's hair, trembling as her tears fell again. She did not correct him. She could not. In her heart, the word felt true. Daniel crouched slightly, his eyes softening as he looked at the boy. "Rest," he said quietly. "You're safe now." But even as he spoke, movement stirred at the edge of the square. More guards had arrived, not just a squad, but a full patrol. 20 armored soldiers marched in tight formation, their heavy boots shaking the ground. Behind them came the same leader from before, his face twisted with fury, humiliation still burning in his eyes. The people's cheers fell into silence, fear returning like a shadow. They had stood against 6 guards, but 20 with weapons ready was different. The spark of defiance wavered. The leader raised his voice, sharp as a whip. "You dare defy me. You dare shame me before the people. Tonight there will be blood. This human will die here, and any who follow him will join him." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some stepped back. Others clutched their children and whispered in fear. The mother's heart sank, her arms tightening around her son. She whispered to Daniel, "There are too many. Please, you cannot fight them all." Daniel's jaw clenched. He knew she was right. He had faced battles before, and even the strongest soldier could not survive against such numbers. But surrender was not in him. He stood taller, blood dripping from his hands, his shadow long against the firelit stalls. His voice cut the air. "If I fall, then let my death show you that their power is not unbreakable. If I fall, then rise without me." The leader smirked, raising his arm. The guards aimed their weapons. Energy hummed across the square, a deadly storm ready to strike. The people cried out in panic, some shielding their children, others stepping backward. The spark was close to dying. Then, something unexpected happened. A single man from the crowd, thin and ragged, stepped forward. He carried nothing but a wooden stick, but his voice shook the air. "No more! If he stands, then so do I!" He planted himself beside Daniel, raising his stick high. Another stepped forward, then another. A woman holding her daughter's hand moved beside them, her chin lifted in defiance. "We will not bow." The leader's smirk faltered as more and more came forward. Dozens of people, unarmed and weak, forming a line beside the human. Their eyes burned with something he could not break: unity. Daniel looked across them, his chest tightening. He had not asked for this, but now it was happening. His small act had grown into something larger than himself. The fire had caught. The leader roared in fury. "Kill them all!" The guards hesitated. Their weapons hummed, but their hands shook. They looked at the sea of faces before them. Men, women, children, poor and broken, but no longer afraid. If they fired now, they would not just kill rebels. They would slaughter innocents. Even hardened soldiers felt their courage falter. Daniel stepped forward, his voice deep and unyielding. "Strike then, but know this. If you do, every corner of this colony will rise. Every street will burn with rebellion. You will not silence them. You will not silence us." The guards froze. They saw the truth in his eyes, in the people's faces. The leader shouted again, desperate, "Obey me! Fire!" But his men did not move. Their weapons lowered, one by one, until silence filled the square. The leader's face twisted, veins rising on his neck. His own soldiers had betrayed his command. He took a step forward, reaching for his dagger again. But this time Daniel was faster. His burned hand shot out, grabbing the leader's collar, dragging him forward. The crowd gasped as Daniel raised his fist and struck. The leader fell hard to the ground, his weapon scattering into the dust. The people erupted. The sound shook the night. Cheers, cries, shouts of freedom. The guards did not raise their weapons again. They stepped back, some even dropping their gear, unwilling to fight the tide they could no longer control. The mother fell to her knees, clutching her child, her voice breaking into sobs of relief. The boy stirred weakly, his eyes half open, and whispered once more, "Papa." This time the word was not faint, it was clear, carrying in the air like a vow. Daniel stood above the fallen leader, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His hands were bloody, his body aching, but his eyes burned with unshakable fire. He looked at the people who stood with him, at the mother and her son, at the guards who had dropped their weapons, and he knew the truth. This was no longer about one starving child. This was about all of them. A law built on hunger and fear had been broken tonight, and there was no turning back. The square was alive with sound. The people cheered, shouted, and wept as the fallen leader lay in the dirt, his power broken. His guards stood frozen, their weapons lowered, unsure whether to run or surrender. Daniel stood above him, blood dripping from his knuckles, his breath heavy but steady. His burned hands ached, but he ignored the pain. His eyes swept over the crowd, and in that moment, they did not see him as just a human soldier. They saw him as a symbol, proof that even one man could shatter chains of fear. The mother pushed through the crowd, holding her child tightly against her chest. She fell to her knees in front of Daniel, tears running freely down her face. "You saved us," she whispered. "Not just me and my boy. You saved them all." She looked at the crowd that surrounded them, voices rising in strength. For years, she had been invisible, ignored, and despised. Now, for the first time, her voice was heard. Her child stirred in her arms, his weak fingers brushing Daniel's sleeve. His lips parted, and again the word came, stronger than before. "Papa." The people fell silent, every ear catching the fragile sound. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked into the boy's tired eyes, and though the word was small, it carried the weight of something greater than any law. The leader groaned in the dirt, his pride more broken than his body. Rage burned in his eyes as he spat. "You think this changes anything? You think one moment of madness can destroy order? The council will send more soldiers. They will crush you all. They will burn this market to the ground." The crowd hissed and shouted at him, but Daniel raised his hand, and silence fell again. His voice was calm, deep, and steady. "Then let them come. We will not hide. We will not bow. Tonight the people found their strength, and no army can take that away." The guards shifted uneasily. Some dropped their weapons completely, the metallic clatter echoing through the night. Others stepped back into the crowd, peeling away from the leader they once served. They were soldiers, yes, but even they could see where the tide had turned. The leader's eyes widened in shock as his men abandoned him. "Cowards! You will all die for this!" His voice cracked with desperation, no longer commanding, but pleading for fear to return. But the people only grew louder. "No more starving children! No more cruel law! We stand together!" Their voices blended into a chant that shook the walls of the buildings around them. Daniel stepped forward, his boots pressing into the dirt beside the fallen leader. His shadow loomed long under the torchlight. He knelt down, his burned hand gripping the front of the leader's armor, lifting him so that their eyes met. "Your time is over," Daniel said, his tone cold and final. Then he released him, letting the man fall back into the dirt, defeated before all who once feared him. The mother rose slowly, standing beside Daniel now. She held her child high enough for all to see, her voice trembling but strong. "This boy lives because one man had mercy. One man remembered what we all forgot. If a human can care for us, then why can't we care for each other?" Her words spread through the crowd like fire, igniting hearts that had been cold for too long. Daniel looked at her, then at the boy, then back to the sea of faces staring at him with hope. He had not come here to lead a rebellion. He had only given food to a starving child. Yet now, somehow, he was at the center of something far greater. The night sky stretched above, stars faintly glowing between drifting clouds. In the distance, alarms began to sound. More soldiers were being called, more enforcers preparing to march. The people heard it too, fear threatening to creep back into their chests. But Daniel raised his voice one last time, louder than the alarms, louder than fear itself. They will come, but when they do, we will not kneel, we will not beg, we will not starve. From this night forward, we stand together. His words struck like thunder, and the people roared in reply, their chant filling every corner of the colony. The mother leaned against him, her child clinging to his chest now, his small face pressed against Daniel's shoulder. She whispered softly, only for him to hear. "Whatever comes, you are not alone." Daniel's heart tightened. He had always thought of himself as a soldier, a fighter with nothing but duty to carry. But now he felt something new, a bond, fragile but powerful. A mother who had nothing but her child, a child who had chosen him with a single word, and a crowd who had found hope in his defiance. The leader crawled away into the shadows, his power shattered, his voice drowned by the rising storm of unity. The guards who remained lowered their heads, some joining the people, others fleeing into the night. The market that had once been a place of silence and cruelty had become the birthplace of rebellion. Daniel stood in the center of it all, his arms wrapped around the child, who still whispered "Papa" against his chest. His burned hands throbbed with pain, his body ached, but his spirit had never been stronger. He looked out at the people, at the torches raised high, at the faces no longer bowed, and he knew the truth. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The alarms grew louder, echoing across the colony, promising that the coming days would be filled with struggle and blood. But the people no longer feared. They had found their voice. They had found their strength. And at the heart of it stood a human soldier who had given his last meal to a starving child. The night was heavy with danger, but it was also alive with hope. For the first time in years, the people believed. And belief, Daniel knew, was stronger than any weapon.